All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole, and welcome to Beyond the Book Festival's Author Spotlight. In the weeks leading up to Beyond the Book, we will be featuring interviews with authors, getting to know them, and see what is going to be coming out for them in the next few months. Beyond the Book Festival is hosted by Starke County Public Library, along with the Horror Writers Association Chicago chapter, and will be held on September 30th, 2023 from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And that is Central Time. That's been a big question. There will be over 30 authors in attendance. The authors will be available for meet and greet. They will have their books on hand to sell. And if you bring your books in, they will sign them. We'll also be doing a lot of discussion panels, and we'll have a big presentation from one of the authors. And with me today is the co-chair of the Horror Writers Association Chicago chapter. He's the author of Suburban Monsters, and he has an upcoming novel. It's called Downpour. That's due in October. This is Christopher Hawkins.
Hi,
Welcome.
everyone. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, we are excited to have you and the HGWA and along with all the other authors as well. So the whole purpose of this is to get to know you, to let the patrons and the people that are going to be coming to the festival get a taste of what it's going to be like. We're all excited. I've got a lot of positive feedback. So again, we are looking forward to this event, and hopefully everything works out well. So, and then we will get right into the questions if you don't mind.
Perfect.
Awesome. A lot of people aren't familiar with the HWA. Can you explain what the HWA is about and how you became involved with them?
Sure. Well, the HWA, the Horror Writers Association, we're an international organization of horror writers who have come together to sort of help support each other and to help further the genre of horror within literature. So, we've got members, all the way from best-selling authors to people who are just starting out on their career path. We do a lot of mentoring. We have scholarship programs for people in need. We also have a hardship fund for writers who are, facing difficulties. People who are working full time who might not, have medical insurance, that sort of thing. A lot of networking, a lot of outreach, a lot of great events. We also do the Bram Stoker Awards, which is the yearly horror. It's sort of the top award within the industry for horror writing. And that happens every year at our StokerCon convention, which is coming up next year in San Diego. Looking forward to that. And yeah, it's just a great group of writers, a great way to network with each other, learn about the craft, learn about the business, and just further your career as a horror writer.
It is awesome. I was just discussing how I had gone to one of the events recently with one of the authors, and I was really, really, really amazed about how much support, because the other members had come out to support him in his book launch, and I thought that was really awesome. You guys are almost like a family atmosphere, which is kind of neat. So
Yeah, it's something we talk about a lot, that people always sort of have this idea in their head that horror writers are like spooky, like very like almost like emo people. But really, I mean, we're in my experience, horror writers are just the warmest, most welcoming, just the best people to be around. So yeah, I mean, it's been a great experience being a member of that group.
they're awesome people. How did you become the co-chair?
Well, we hold elections every year, and the Chicago chapter itself. I'm the co-chair of the Chicago chapter, not the larger national organization. We have chapters all around the country, but we hold elections every year, and people step up that want to work in a leadership role within the organization. We have national elections as well, so it's all sort of a democratic process. But yeah, I was actually approached by Shauna a few years ago, who's our other co-chair. Um, there had been a Chicago group at one point, but then it sort of disbanded, and she was working to reform the group. So she and I talked a lot and kind of worked together on that, and have been helping to kind of bring in uh, new membership in the area and bring in more writers to be a part of that group. And we've grown pretty considerably. We've added new members, we're adding people every week, and we just continue to grow and grow. We've got people from all the way from southern Wisconsin all the way to northwest Indiana. So it's, even though it's the Chicago group, we cover a lot of a lot of geographical area, and it's just been a great experience getting to know all of these writers from the Chicago area.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Going into horror, it's making a comeback. I'm a personal fan of horror. Everybody knows. Whenever there's a request or like, hey, find Nicole, she's gonna tell you. But I love that it's coming back. But there are some folks that don't like it at all. If you could convince them to give horror a try, what would you say to these people?
Oh, that's a great question, because there's so many, horror takes on so many different forms, and there's so many different ways of telling stories that have horror as an element, right? So if someone is very much into, sort of the literary side of fiction, send them to Cormac McCarthy. A lot of people don't consider Cormac McCarthy a horror author, but he is absolutely a horror author. I mean, he writes some of the scariest stuff I have read, and some of the most, some of the darkest, most, the most difficult dives into the human psyche that I've ever read. So I think it's a matter of finding out what they do like, and then pointing to something that's adjacent. If they like the YA, and if they like the Twilight, then there are YA horror books that we can steer them towards. If they want something that's more in the adventure realm, then there are sort of adventure horror stories that we can send them to.
Oh yeah, so many subgenres. It's wonderful.
Mhm.
And I've been reading a lot on how I kind of refer back to one of your podcasts that you had done recently. There was an interview when you did this interview, you and the host had discussed how people who have had traumatic experiences in their life tend to sway towards horror. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, I think that the nice thing about reading something scary on the page is that you can always close the book if it gets to be too much, right? And there are people out there who are genuinely struggling in their daily life, and dealing with all kinds of issues in terms of mental health and in terms of past trauma, that are able to take all of those feelings that might be swirling around in their head, and as they're reading a book, those feelings kind of get set aside and almost sort of get replaced by what they're reading. So if they're reading something scary, they can process that kind of emotion in a way that is um more of like a sort of bite-sized, controllable amount. And then when it becomes too much, you just set the book aside, you close the page, and you're able to kind of go on with your life. There's this great, I think the term is neuron mirroring. So like if you're reading a story, what happens in your brain is you start to respond to that story as if those events are happening to you. And then when you do that, it teaches your brain how to deal with those situations. And that's why story in general is just so powerful. So,
Right.
I think that for people who have had that kind of trauma in their life, they tend to gravitate towards horror just for those exact reasons, because it gives them that outlet and it gives them that context that they're able to sort of reshape their own experiences.
No, yeah, I like the fact that you can control, like, whether you're watching a movie or whether you're reading a book, you can stop it at any point. No,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's great. Or turn the lights on, just
Yes.
so when you are writing, and because I mean, you've written some horror in your time. Uh, when you are writing and you get to a part that it tends to be a little graphic, whether it's in a sexual nature or a really just, a gory moment. Does it ever run through your head that, hey, my wife or my kids or my friends might be reading this, are they going to think I'm crazy? How do you overcome that wall and just write without worrying about judgment or humiliation or anything like that?
There's this great quote about Joe R. Lansdale, who's an HWA member, by the way.
Mhm.
And I can't remember the exact wording or who said it about him, but uh, they said that Joe writes as if everyone he knows is dead. And I
That's
try to
great.
try to keep that in mind because, if you're going to be true to the story that you're trying to tell, you can't really be too preoccupied with what people are going to think about it or think about you. You
Right.
have to be true to those characters on the page. So I do think about that a lot when I'm writing that, okay, I need to set all of that aside and not worry too much about what people's impressions are going to be. And I am fortunate that, the people that are close to me, who, engage with my writing, they know that the book is not necessarily the personality that I have as a human being, so
Right.
they're able to separate that. So I'm kind of fortunate in that regard.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's funny because I have a friend who is trying to get into the author business, and I've beta read some of his stuff, and I'm like, wow, I didn't think your mind would go there. So it is kind of funny. I've seen where some writers will carry around a notepad just in case they have ideas for stories. Have you ever randomly just a thought had come into your head, like, you're in the shower or you were on a trip, or you're in the middle of a ball game and then you didn't have anything to write on? Do you stop what you're doing and go find something to write this idea on, or does it just like go to the wayside?
Yeah, if I have something like that, I always have to capture it right away because anytime that I've told myself, oh yeah, I'll remember this even in 5 minutes, it's just gone.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so yeah, so I use my phone a lot, because I'm never without my phone. So I'll use apps on my phone to kind of keep track of those notes, and I'm always, whenever I have even just like a weird line of dialogue that pops into my head, or a funny situation, or some like odd dark thought that might not go anywhere, I try to capture it so that I'll have it later on.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Do you find it hard to come up with ideas? Like, have you ever had writer's block? And if you have, was it forever? Just I know it's difficult to write, but I know life does get into in your way. Um,
Sure.
so yeah, I just
Um,
is it hard to come up with stuff?
Yeah, and for me, the ideas themselves are not difficult. It's sometimes weeding through those ideas to find the ones that are worth pursuing.
Hmm.
Again, I capture a lot of stuff, so I have, pages and pages of story ideas that may never go anywhere. But sometimes, when you take them out and you start to kind of knock them together and kind of turn them over in your head, sometimes they'll turn into something that you can develop into a book or you can develop into a story. Um, so yeah, but in terms of writer's block, usually if I have a problem with writer's block, it's more from a standpoint of um, being too much in my own head and worrying too much about the quality of the work that's going out. And when you write a first draft, it's going to be garbage no matter how hard you work on it. You always have to
Right.
go through that constant refining process. So yeah, whenever I'm blocked up as a writer, it's usually from a standpoint of trying too hard, and not just letting go and let the words come out.
No, I hear you on that one. Is horror the only genre that you ever write about, or do you ever go sway towards like anything else, like science fiction? Um,
Yeah, well, one of the books that I'm working on finishing up right now is kind of a sort of more of an urban fantasy with a lot of horror elements to it. So I think everything I write is very horror adjacent, but it's uh horror is sort of a constant element within all of it, and that's what I like about horror is that if you write a science fiction book, you can have a science fiction horror book, you can have a literary fiction horror book. It doesn't. It's not a genre that has to be one thing.
mhm.
So everything I write kind of has that horror tinge to it, but I do like to kind of play around in science fiction and fantasy a little bit as well.
I'll throw this idea out there.
Mhm.
Amish romance horror. kidding. But that was
No,
interesting. I
honestly,
don't think there is anything like that.
that would be kind of amazing. And I recently found out that my great grandfather on one of my great grandfathers on my mother's side was Amish and ended up leaving um, that settlement in order to kind of live more in the modern world.
We
So,
won't collaborate. We'll collaborate on that later. But what I'm saying is we won't go any further on the idea in case anybody's watching that might want to
oh,
take.
exactly. Yeah, nobody steal that. That's ours. Yeah.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. Okay, so speaking of collaborations, have you ever done a collaboration? And if you have not, who would be a dream collaborator? Is that a
Yeah,
collaboration? Want to collaborate?
not yet. I mean, my writing process can be a little chaotic sometimes, so I often wonder if anyone would necessarily want to have me inflicted upon them as a partner. But yeah, I mean, God, any of the writers in the Chicago group, I think would be a dream to collaborate with. So like Daniel Kraus and Jonathan Jans and Cynthia Playo. I mean, we've got such a great group of writers in there. I mean, they'd all just be amazing to work with.
Oh yeah, no, I've read a lot of their work. They're awesome. And Cynthia just won that Bram Stoker that you guys were talking
Yes,
about. So that's
yes,
amazing. That's
yep.
awesome.
Hmm.
No, so is there like anybody like, going back, because I think you'd mentioned before that you liked is it oh like Stephen King, I mean, or even Brad, oh, he's more scientific or science fiction, but anybody that you like, is there anybody like living or non-living that you would want to eventually, or not eventually, but if you could write something with them?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many like non-living people that I would love to kind of play in their universe a little bit. So, there's a writer named Manly Wade Wellman who did this series with a character named John the Balladeer, who kind of he's like this wandering bard in Appalachia who kind of comes across these supernatural situations and these weird monsters and has to
That's
pit
awesome.
himself against them. Yeah, and they're fantastic stories. I think Valancourt is actually coming out with a collected edition of all of those stories either next month or the month after. But I'd love to play in that universe. I'd love to play in uh, you know, the that sort of Hyperborean Conan the Barbarian universe that Bob Howard put together. That would
Right.
be fun to do.
That would be awesome.
Hmm.
Um, if you must name one novel that made you decide this is it, I need to be an author. I need to write
Hmm.
my own book. This is my future, this is where I'm going. What was the book that just made you decide that you had to be an author?
Oh yeah, I mean Stephen King was such a big early influence, and I remember reading The Stand for the first time, and I hadn't ever read anything like that as a kid. And I was reading Stephen King very young, like probably too young. And yeah, so I read that, and it was just such an epic story that was still very visceral and still had that um, that immediacy that horror brings to it. That idea of people being in immediate danger, but still set against this epic backdrop of good versus evil. And yeah, I thought that was a sort of magic all on its own, and
Oh
that
yeah.
was a big thing that pushed me into writing.
No, that's great. I love The Stand myself, but well, it looks like we are running out of time. So I am going to thank you for doing this interview with me. I can't wait to see you at Beyond the Book Festival in September. And
Same
then
here, yeah.
yeah, if you guys, if anybody watching this wants to find out any more information about Christopher Hawkins, his website is Christopher-Hawkins.com. He is also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
And
Um,
Instagram and Threads and Blue Sky and
yeah,
all
absolutely.
of the other
And
sites. Yeah.
yeah, definitely hit him up if you guys have any questions for him. And then again, if you want more information on the book festival, it is the www.scpls.org, Starke County Public Library System. And that's September 30th, this year, 2023, and from 9 to 3. So Chris, thank you so much. This was wonderful. All
Thank you,
right.
Nicole. It was great being
No
here.
problem. No problem. Okay, so